Okay, let's get started. As you can see, this is the 32 Ford Street Rod kit that we started with. It is only buildable in one way, and that is as a street rod, at least straight from the box. My overall review of the kit is it's actually not a bad kit. It's pretty detailed. It's got some really nice little parts in it. I particularly like the front and rear suspension backing plates. They look very, very much like those from a post-war Ford, say 46 through 48, and also pre-war, I believe the 40 Fords, maybe even the 39s had backing plates that looked about the same. But regardless, that was a nice little thing. I thought looked really nice on there. Everything fit nicely. Really no build issues out of the box with this kit. Everything lined up nice. It was a pleasant little build. I am going to start by priming everything that's going to get painted in the kit. One of the other things that I like to do sometimes is I will actually leave the parts on the sprue when I start putting color on them. So, in other words, as you can see in this picture here, there's some items that have been painted cast steel or aluminum, maybe a semi-gloss black, and those items just got left on the sprue because it makes it easier for me to handle it. And to go back and touch it up after it's taken off the sprue is not a big deal. One of the things that I don't know if I want to say I didn't care for with this kit, but it only comes with one engine, and that is a small block Chevy motor, which is fine. However, I wanted to go a little different route than the street rod look and feel for this build. My initial idea was to build this in I'm going to say like an early 50s style hot rod that a younger individual will be putting together. That being said, one of the items that I absolutely didn't want to use was that small block Chevy that came in the kit. So I wanted to replace that with a period correct flathead engine. And going through the parts box, I discovered two donors. One looked a little bit too stock, but the other one looked a little bit too show car, I should say, because it had a lot of chrome on it, chrome heads, chrome intake, things like that. And I just didn't think that it met the bill for what I wanted this build to really be. So I was trying to figure out how to do this flathead in a way that would be pretty period correct. I didn't think that the builder of this particular hot rod would have been able to afford aluminum or chrome-plated head, nor did I think they'd be able to afford a multi-carburetor intake. So one of the things that I really thought would fit the build nicely is a 2x1 intake adapter. Well, I don't know of any existing kits that have said type of intake adapter. So I needed to fab my own. But here you'll see some examples of the intake adapter that I'm talking about. They were made, if I'm not mistaken, Fenton made some, Navarro I think might have made some, even maybe Edelbrock. I thought it really fit the era of what I wanted this build to be. I had no idea if one of these intakes really existed, so I had to basically scratch build one. So I took some hollow plastic tubing and kind of the first time I tried to form it into an actual V or U shape, that didn't work out so I knew I was going to have to make it in two pieces and then basically body fill it together and sand it smooth and all that other good stuff. It was going to need an actual base plate, and it was probably going to need a bit of massaging. So it's not a very large piece, but when I started building it, scratch building it, I made it oversized so it made it easier for me to work. So I cut the hollow tubing in half and put matching bends in them, which after that, I actually took a small piece of wire, bent it, inserted it into each side of the hollow tube, and zapped that gap. Here you can see, after it's been filled and the two pieces of hollow tubing have been blended together, you can see how much smaller this thing really is than what it started with. In order to make it the right size to scale, that's just kind of what had to be done. I actually kind of like this. I thought it was something kind of cool, not something you normally see. Basically a stock-looking 59AB flathead, which would have been a typical upgrade for a 32 Ford, a little bit later model engine, that is. And here you can see it with the scratch-built intake manifold adapter and to what would be Stromberg 97 carburetor. This is getting ready to be detailed with some fuel lines and some plug wires and a bunch of other stuff. This kit has basically all street rod parts, so they're going to be a little bit more current, newer style parts, and that's not at all what this build was supposed to be. So I decided to use a different type of steering wheel that looked to be custom, but a little bit more period correct. And you can see in here, sitting in front of the flathead, prior to installation into the interior. I like to take a little time and get rid of a lot of the manufacturer's mold marks, the mold release points that are pretty obvious when you flip over a kit. I just don't think it looks right. I don't think it looks realistic. I guess it's everybody's choice what they want to do, but I just think it makes it a little bit more realistic. And even though it is a model kit, and you can, in my opinion, go a little bit overboard with detailing, I think it's little things like this that actually make a nice little difference, or make it stand out a little bit more. Sanding off, for example, the copyright dates, where it was manufactured, and a couple of the mold release pinhole things being filled, and then they will be sanded smooth at a later date. What period correct hot rod, or custom for that matter, would be complete without wide white wall tires? I really like the rims that came with this kit. They're a really nice chrome reverse. They do come with baby moon caps. I did not, as you'll see, use the baby moon caps because I like this look better without the cap. But definitely needed some white wall action on this build to, in my opinion, make it look a little bit more period correct. The representation of this model was to be a younger individual building this in the early 50s, maybe even the late 40s, but somewhere in that era. Not that I necessarily wanted to build another black vehicle. There were not a lot of options at the time for different colors. And besides that, I thought a young individual building his first hot rod is probably not going to be overly concerned with the paint on the vehicle or be able to afford a nice paint job. So, flat black it is. I thought what would be kind of cool, I didn't want to go too crazy with the patina, but I thought it might be kind of cool to sort of make this 32 Ford Roadster look like it might have been stored in a barn for a little while prior to it being hot rodded. I didn't want it to look all scratched up and beat up, just more slightly used and dirty. Now, something that I like to use that I think works really well, along with maybe some sandpaper, is a green Scotch-Brite pad. I think it's a nice consistency. You can get some really nice looking, it's patina, but it's almost like where the paint is rubbed through to the primer, whatever you want to call it. Is that patina? That's what I would call it, but I'm trying to explain it a little bit better so you understand what I'm saying, and I probably just confused everybody anyway. Ugh. I actually really like the suspension setup and the chassis in general, with the exception of two things. One are right under on the floorboard up toward the transmission crossmember are two standoffs that are molded into the bottom of the model kit that were used if you were going to use the stock exhaust system, and that was their basic mounting point. Their secondary mounting point was actually spots molded into the gas tank. Now, who in their right mind would mount a exhaust hanger to a gas tank? No one. So, those were removed from the gas tank, and I decided I was going to reuse the molded stanchions and hand make some exhaust hangers once the flathead and all was assembled and set up, and I could create some exhaust pipes that were going to that would dump out on the sides under the running boards. So I figured I'd leave those there and reuse those for the hangers. But the ones on the gas tank had to go. The chassis and tires and wheels and the body have been placed together in a mock-up situation just so I could see how this flathead was actually going to fit. I had been checking it as the build went on. It seemed like it was going to be okay, but I really wanted to double check and make sure, because this wasn't an option from the box. This was a leftover flathead from a completely different kit manufacturer. So you got to double check, because maybe those 1/24th and 1/25th scales might just throw things off enough to make interference a problem. So I wanted to mock up the flathead in the chassis and all. At least the plug wires and whatnot have been detailed into the engine. And as you can see, there is now a chrome fuel block and fuel line mounted to the firewall. Will be usurping the fuel pump that is on the intake manifold. Dirt, per se, being added to the body, trying to give it that non-beat, just used and dirty look, kind of make it, one of those, little sleazy hot rod kind of look. Made up some fuel lines from that fuel block that I mentioned earlier, put the red hose to that because I always like the look that kind of transparent red fuel line kind of gives a little bit of extra spice to the motor and the engine compartment area. So I thought I would go with that in this situation as well, just to break it up a little bit and kind of make it look cool. Final assembly stages with the custom steering wheel, a parts box find installed, and the interior of the kit, once again, is you don't have the option of doing anything stock. It's like a tuck and roll pattern in there that comes with the kit. You can't really do much with it. Maybe you could scratch built an interior. I wasn't going to go to that point because I actually like the way the interior that came with the kit looks. So I just reused that and tried to weather that a little bit to make it look like that leather was kind of maybe cracking a little bit, or just make it look like it was worn a bit. And throw a little color in there. Black and red always look nice together. I feel like I use those combinations too much in my builds. I'm going to try to get away from that. Everything in place. Bumpers, windshield, grill, headlights, all that good stuff. Patinaed and dirtied just enough, in my opinion, to make it look realistic. I actually really like the way this kit turned out. It was a fun build. And to kind of, kit bash some parts together, give it a little bit more of an early hot rodding era look as opposed to the street rod look. That kind of made my day. So, taking a look at this, taking a step back and looking at it, I decided, what is this build really? Well, it's like an old school jalopy, and it's a little dirty and everything, and then it hit me. It is the Sloppy Jalopy.